In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. And they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam, and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted, and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. Our planet on fire. Treason is the most profitable business Trump has ever engaged in. Is Liz Cheney going to be the one to save the Republican Party? Tucker Carlson is two-timing Orban with Bolsonaro, continuing his love affair with authoritarians. And Reverend William Barber is getting arrested, perhaps as we speak. And if he is processed in time, will be with us on the program in our third hour. So, you know, we'll see how that shakes out, but we are hoping to have him on the program. He's up to some really great stuff, and I want you to know all about it. So I want to start out with the Supreme Court decisions that came down this morning. As I said, the Supreme Court just lit our planet on fire. It seems complicated. It's really not complicated. And most Americans are not going to have a clue of what happened because, frankly, all the analyses that I've seen so far on most of the websites have been like, you know, dry, boring, filled with jargon and, you know, legalese and stuff like that. But let me tell you what just happened. Prior to today, before now, going back basically about a century, certainly back to the 1930s when we got some of our first really serious regulatory agencies. The Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, was created by the Franklin Roosevelt administration, I believe in 33. But in any case, maybe 34. But in any case, the way it works is Congress looks at a problem. With the SEC, when they created that, it was, thieves on Wall Street. With the EPA, it's pollution. With the National Highway Safety Board, it's, whether cars should have seatbelts. Or, people dying in car accidents. So Congress looks at a problem, and they say, okay, we got this problem. People are dying in cars unnecessarily. People can't join unions, whatever it may. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is burning our planet down. That's the one that the decision was about today. And so they say and so what Congress does is they pass a law establishing a regulatory agency to solve that problem. So Richard Nixon signed legislation to create the Environmental Protection Agency to solve the problem of pollution. And Congress can say to the EPA, we want you to do something about a specific thing. In this case, this was an Obama rule. We want you to, or the EPA doing something under Obama. We want you to do something about climate change. Solve this problem. So the EPA then has a whole bunch of scientists who work for it. And the EPA gets those scientists together, and they have outside scientists as well, consultants and things that they bring in. And they go through, it was typically a year or two long process of saying, okay, here's the problem. What are all the possible solutions? And these scientists will come up with, well, we could limit tailpipe emissions. We could mandate that people insulate their homes. We could do this. We could do that. We could do it. And then the question is, which of those things are, within the EPA's power? It gets narrowed down by the bureaucrats at the EPA. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. These are the people who actually do the work, and the scientists at the EPA. And they evaluate literally thousands of hours of testimony by scientists. They themselves, being scientists, are evaluating this information. And finally, the EPA comes forward and says, okay, here's the new rule that we think will solve this problem. Cars have to be more efficient, and wellheads can't leak, for example. This was actually what this case was about. The EPA saying that. And so then the EPA publishes that as a prospective rule, says this is how we intend to do it, and the public can comment on it. The same thing happened with the FCC with net neutrality. Remember that? A couple of years ago, we were all going to the FCC website and making public comments on net neutrality. Same deal. So the public can comment on it. After the public comment period closes and all the scientists have looked at it and Congress has had a chance to look at it, then the EPA finally says, okay, this is now the new rule. This is the law. We are going to enforce it. And if you are manufacturing cars that don't conform to this mileage standard, then you have to pay a fine. That's how it's always worked. What the Supreme Court said today is that the only role that the EPA can play is that of cop on the beat. In other words, enforcing the rule. Congress, the Supreme Court today said, has to write the rule, which means that a congressional committee, the Health and the Environmental Committee in the House and Senate, I believe it's called the Committee on the Environment, but I could be wrong. But whatever, the committee charged with dealing with the environment in the House and the Senate, which is typically, a dozen or 2 dozen members of Congress, they are going to have to hire hundreds of scientists to do an in-depth and exhaustive evaluation. And then these members of Congress are going to have to evaluate the science and come up with the rules. And then they're going to have to publish those rules. They're going to have to make those rules into law and say the law now says that, tailpipe emissions can't go above a certain point or mileage must be whatever. Congress has to pass that law. And all the EPA can do is go to General Motors and say, hey, your cars are putting out too much pollution. You're going to be fined $1,000 a day per car or whatever. So, number one, this is a disaster for the environment. But number two, by overturning what's called the Chevron deference, back in 1984, Chevron sued the EPA saying, you can't regulate us. And the Supreme Court looked at it and said, sure they can. The regulatory agencies have all the expertise, they have all the scientists, they know what they're doing, so, we need, us, the courts, we need to defer to the regulatory agencies. And that's why it's called the Chevron deference, is because it's out of the Chevron versus EPA case, and it requires everybody, but particularly the courts, to defer to the judgment of the regulatory agencies. Well, that got blown up today, which means that every regulatory agency, unless I'm reading this decision wrong, and if there's any attorneys out there who are schooled in this kind of law, give me a shout and tell me if I'm missing this, if I've got something wrong here, but I don't think so. The way that I'm reading this decision, every regulatory agency is now going to be subject to challenge. Things will continue as normal until some employee sues OSHA and says, I shouldn't have to wear a safety strap when I'm working on a 30-story tower, on a steel tower, on a steel beam. I shouldn't have to wear that. Congress didn't say that. OSHA came up with that rule. Or I shouldn't have to wear a respirator when I'm dealing with toxic materials. Or, you know, so that would be OSHA. The National Highway Traffic Safety, you know, somebody's going to sue and say, airbags, who said airbags? Congress never said airbags. You guys put this, you know, and suddenly airbags go away. The Department of Labor, somebody will sue and say, oh, I don't want to have to pay dues to this union. That's a rule that the National Transportation Safety Administration, or, you know, it came up with a regulatory agency. It's not Congress. You understand what I'm saying here? When Steve Bannon said that the goal of the Trump administration was to deconstruct the administrative state, I'm betting 95% of Americans had no friggin' clue what he was talking about. This is what he was talking about. The administrative state is the regulatory agencies that are hated by big corporations, by Charles Koch, and the Koch Industries, by the other right-wing billionaires. You know, the tech billionaires hate the possibility of their being regulated. I mean, you know, pick your billionaire and your industry. They all hate regulatory agencies. And this is exactly what has happened, at least as far as I'm able to read this. The Supreme Court today has lit our planet on fire. Because if you think that Congress is going to be able to pass these kinds of regulations over a filibuster, when Joe Manchin is taking money from the fossil fuel industry, and probably Kirsten Sinema too, we know she's taking money from Big Pharma, and every single Republican is in the pockets of these people, they're still denying climate change. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I also have to tell you why treason is the most profitable business Trump ever engaged in. We'll get to that after the break, and I'll pick up your phone calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Jack in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today? Jack, you are on the air. I am not hearing Jack. Let's try Skip in Muskegon, Michigan. Hey, Skip, what's up?
Well, this is to do with oil and free advertisements that they're getting. First, I got to say that Toyota in 2014 had one of their cars in a race. That thing was getting 2,800 RPM, and they ran it on ammonia. You don't have to do much to the engine. You have to do a little bit to the catalytic converter, I guess, but it burns clean. It's not fossil fuel. Now, today on Wood TV, I'm in Muskegon, of course, in Wyoming, Michigan, Americans for Prosperity, that's probably big oil.
It's the one that was created by the Koch brothers network, yeah.
Oh, great. They were giving away from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. gas for $2.38 a gallon, and the woman says that's what gas was going for when Biden got into office, and look where he has it now. And lie. And if you want to know more lies, of course they didn't say the lie, but, you know, yeah. I'm embellishing. They said go to the truecostofwashington.com. They're going all over the country doing this. getting free publicity. No one's on after them to counter and say, my God, they're lying. You know, I tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, these billionaires, I mean, you know, the Supreme Court in their Citizens United decision said, yeah, billionaires can spend all the money they want, and the fossil fuel industry can spend all the money it wants to try to change public opinion or elect particular members of Congress, and they're doing it. I mean, you know, hey, if it's legal and you can jack up your profits and make billions of dollars while the planet is on fire, you know, if you're a sociopath, go for it, right? I mean, it's just... It's insane. It's just flat out insane. Thank you, Skip. Diane in San Diego. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Good morning. I was just listening to the Stephanie Miller show right at the very end, and they brought up what's going on in the Supreme Court, and one of them said there are 9 Supreme Court justices, or used to be 9, well, there are 9 because there used to be 9 circuit courts.
That's correct.
We're up to 13 circuit courts now.
That's correct.
And so we have every right to go to a 13-member SCOTUS. I write to my congressman regularly. So when I write to them this time, I would like to tell them why we could have 13. Is it presidential fiat? Is it tradition? You know, what? How do we get that?
Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution says that the Supreme Court shall be regulated by Congress. And so Congress has changed the makeup of the Supreme Court a whole bunch of times, I think 7 or 8 times. When it started out, there were 6 members of the court. There were 3 circuit courts. So it was 2 members per circuit. It slowly grew up to 10. Then it got chopped down to, I think it was 7. When Andrew Johnson was president, Congress cut it so that he couldn't put somebody on the court. And then it went back up to 9 when Ulysses Grant became president after Andrew Johnson left office. And it's stayed at 9 ever since. And there were 9 circuit courts at that time. Arguably, if you want to go with, you know, the Jeffersonian idea, the founders' idea, there should be, if there's 13 courts, there should be 26 justices. Diane, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So treason is the most profitable business Trump ever engaged in. He made $1.6 billion while he was president. And he's made a little over $500 million since he left the presidency. While he was president, of course, you know, he wanted to have a Trump Tower in Moscow. This is, by the way, the most charitable explanation for Trump's behavior. It could be that he was being blackmailed. It could be that he simply hates America, and he thinks America should be an autocratic nation like Russia. Frankly, I think that that's also a very likely possibility. You've got, you know, Tucker Carlson doing his show from Brazil and interviewing Bolsonaro. There's this big push on Fox News to promote the right-wingers. I'll tell you about that, more about that in the second and third hour of the program. But during the time that Trump was president, you know, his first week in office, he invited the ambassador and the foreign minister of Russia into the White House, and right in front of them and God and everybody, outed an Israeli spy who was working on behalf of the United States, burned this spy to Russia. This had to do with the war in Syria that Russia was then prosecuting. He trashed our intelligence agencies. He shut down the Office of Cybersecurity, the White House Office of Cybersecurity, and the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Cybersecurity. And what happened? The Russians came in and set up house inside the Treasury Department and the Commerce Department that we know of for sure. And the other agencies aren't talking. But Trump basically invited the Russians inside the computers of our government. And, you know, nobody's debating that. It was in the New York Times. He denied weapon systems to Ukraine. He was impeached for this. He tried to extort Vladimir Zelensky, saying, "Oh, you want these weapon systems? We're holding them back until you do what I say." Tell the world that Joe Biden did something corrupt in Ukraine. Right. He was doing this on behalf of Putin. Donald Trump is Putin's poodle. He did his best to cripple NATO. Remember that? He withheld U.S. funds for NATO for almost a year. I mean, it was just, and trash talked NATO everywhere he could go. He welcomed Russian money that was funneled through the NRA and other front groups. I mean, and then after he left, he raised $500 million in contributions. Being president, back in 2000, when the first time Trump was talking about running for president, he said that that he would be. Let me give you the exact quote. He said, "It's very possible that I could be the first presidential candidate to run and make money on it." It's exactly what he's done. I mean, but Trump isn't the first to this game. This is the entire premise of the Reagan Revolution, this embrace of neoliberalism, putting financial interests, money, ahead of national interest. Patriotism has become the main focus of an entire industry of think tanks and bill mills like ALEC that crank out model legislation for bought-off members of Congress, both state and federal, to enact into law. I mean, it's very straightforward. And as I said, this goes back to the Reagan Revolution and also to Citizens United. Now you've got the Federalist Society that has put its people on the Supreme Court. And today, there are very few members of the House of Representatives. I mean, 40 years ago, before, when Reagan came into office, most members of the House of Representatives are average working people. In fact, most senators were. Barry Goldwater, his family owned a department store in Phoenix. I mean, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't rich. He was okay. He was, wealthy by middle class standards, but not rich. And it wasn't just Goldwater. There were very few millionaire senators or multimillionaire senators back in 1980, and almost none in the House of Representatives, because big money didn't control politics. And it didn't take big money to get into politics. But then, Reagan changed the rules of the game, and the Supreme Court changed the rules of the game. And now there's pretty much not a single member of the House of Representatives who's not a multimillionaire. And you've got members of the Senate. I mean, Mitt Romney's probably a billionaire. He's not telling, but it sure looks like he should be. You got Rick Scott, who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You've got most of your other senators are worth tens of millions of dollars. And many of them got that rich while they were senators because they carved an exemption into the insider trading laws, so that when they know that a particular drug company is going to get a government contract or a particular defense contractor is going to get a government contract, and they know it before you and I know it, they just go in and buy a whole pile of stock. I mean, we saw this was happening all over the place. The Kelly, what was her name? Kelly Lofgren, the senator from Georgia, who was briefly the senator from Georgia, the Republican, whose husband was the head of the New York Stock Exchange, got busted for this. All kinds of insider trading. What happened? Basically nothing. We have to extract this cancer of big money in our politics from our body politic. It is a cancer, and it is eating our democracy alive. This is the poison or the fuel on which Putin's Russia runs, on which Bolsonaro's Brazil runs, on which Orban's Hungary runs, all countries that are now embraced by Fox News and Tucker Carlson and basically the fifth column in the United States. The people on the inside who want to see this country turned into an authoritarian autocracy, a strongman dictatorship. Donald Trump is not going to be the standard bearer of this any longer. I'm predicting it's going to be Ron DeSantis, and I think that, there's a possibility. I think the possibility is getting more remote that Don Jr. will be his running mate. I think the Trump brand has been so sullied now that it's frankly more likely it'll be Kristi Noem or somebody like that. Put a woman on the ticket along with Ron DeSantis, but this is their goal. DeSantis is trying it out down in Florida. Greg Abbott is doing it in Texas. Authoritarian rule. Ignore the law. Punish your enemies. Reward your friends. Use the power of government to do both. We got to overturn Citizens United.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Citizens United and its predecessors. I mean, this is entirely given to us by the Supreme Court. We need to overturn these rulings. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was for him illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. You can, apparently the book report that we played wasn't quite right. But what I've been saying here, and I'll be continuing to say it in just a moment to our entire audience, is that, and in fact, okay, we're back, is that this is a coup. I mean, you know, make no mistake about it. The Supreme Court today executed a coup. Robert Reich just published his newsletter over at Substack. I was reading it during the break, and he was saying the same thing I was. And he was saying, you know, the National Labor Relations Act, he literally was going back to the 19-teens and the 1930s and saying these regulations and these regulatory agencies are now crippled. The Supreme Court is taking us back to the Lochner era and arguably even before that. This is insane. So, picking up your phone calls, Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind today?
Thomas, boy, that's just in quite a lead into what I want to say, as well as your reference to Jefferson earlier. I want to remind you, me, and everybody of two things that Jefferson said that I think are incredibly important right now. One is probably a spurious, very short comment that we all remember. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. But what is not spurious, and is certainly in his papers and in the Declaration itself, upon which I would suggest all the powers that we possess as we the people rest. He said, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it's their right, it is their duty to throw off such government.
Yeah, that's from the Declaration of Independence.
The court, right? Strong words.
Yeah.
Or as Maxine Waters said just a few days ago, to hell with the court.
Yeah.
And again, Michael Moore's brilliant quote, abort this court.
Yeah.
It's just gone beyond now. This EPA ruling has me, I mean, I have more than steam coming out of my ears. It's lava at this point.
Yeah.
It's just incredible what they are going to attempt to do to us, as you said, to eviscerate virtually all federal agencies and their powers to regulate, as though, impossibly, as though the Congress could in any possible way possess the amount of information and data that the agencies possess via their long, in-depth studies of the issues at hand, as you were saying.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
No, yeah, it's nuts, Nicholas. It's truly nuts. And
but what are we supposed to do here? What can we do?
We have to express our outrage to our elected officials. We have to pray that Chuck Schumer will grow a spine, and we have to elect as many Democrats as we possibly can to the House and Senate.
I think that's really the only way. I think the former things are useless at this point. I don't have very much faith at all in our so-called representatives. They're just representing very poorly.
Yeah.
And I think, as you say, it's get more Democrats everywhere throughout. And down ballot, by the way, way down ballot, as deep as we can go.
Yep, absolutely. From the school board on up, from the dog catcher on up, we need to get politically active, and we need to be voting. Nicholas, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the call. Jay in Stockton, California. Hey, Jay, what's on your mind today?
Hey, well, what logic did the Supreme Court use for their decision? I mean, I'm a physician, and we have JCO that comes to the hospital to regulate the health standards and stuff. I mean, is JCO not going to be? Are they also going to be defanged?
Well, here's the thing. What this decision did not automatically kill all those agencies. What it did is it said basically any agency can be taken down with a lawsuit. So if somebody sues JCO, and forgive me, Jay, I don't know what JCO is, but if it's a regulatory agency that oversees physicians, then if Congress in the law that created JCO didn't explicitly say what the regulations should be, then yes, those regulations can be blown up. If my understanding of this Supreme Court decision is accurate, and everything I've read so far, including Robert Reich, the former Labor Secretary's piece that he just published about 10 minutes ago, corroborates that perspective. So, yeah.
I'll take a look at that. And two more things. Number one, I'll never understand why Democratic Party advisors and consultants aren't mandated to listen to your show, because, most of the things you talk about sooner or later become real. And
Thank you.
The third thing is, God, the Supreme Court is on a roll. They've been driving the nail into the coffin of America, of the America we knew, for the past 2 weeks. They've basically overturned everything.
Yep.
This is amazing.
Yep. And there's more to come, by the way. They just accepted a case to decide whether individual state legislatures can overturn the Electoral College vote in their states.
You know what? That would be a good reason to get rid of the Electoral College. Somebody's got to start that discussion once again.
Yeah, or a good reason to rebalance and unpack the Supreme Court. Jay,
which is what I don't.
Go ahead.
Which is what I don't get. Don't the I don't see any. All the Democrats have been doing so far is coming out and saying, yeah, vote harder, give us money, but I don't hear a plan. They got to give us a plan, because the way I feel, if you give them like 100 more representatives and at least 10 more senators, I still think, with their current leadership and the way they are, they still won't be able to do anything. I need to see a plan from them.
Yeah. Chuck Schumer needs to go back and watch from 1994. He needs to go back and watch some clips of Newt Gingrich. I realize it was the House, not the Senate, but still, the principle remains. Jay, thank you very much for the call. Kate in New York City. Hey, Kate, what's on your mind today?
Well, I guess that's what Steve Bannon meant when he talked about the dismantling of the administrative state.
That's exactly what he meant. This literally is exactly what he meant.
All right. Well, I guess we have to wait and see what happens. I was calling basically about January 6th. Mm-hmm. I called Benny Thompson's office yesterday, and I asked to be connected to that department. And all I could do was leave a message, and I said, what is being done about this memo from Christopher Miller, who was the acting Secretary of Defense, who basically told the D.C. National Guard that they had to stand down on January 6th.
Yeah, and it was on January 4th memo, by the way. So this was apparently part of the pre-riot planning. And
it's stunning. This memo that is available for anyone to read. It seems to me to be direct evidence of a conspiracy at the highest levels of government.
I agree. I have the memo here. I'll read it to people in just a moment. But yeah, keep going.
Well, I left a message. I'm sure they're aware of it. I don't know why they don't call Christopher Miller as a witness, put him into a deposition, and ask him who gave you this order. It's stunning. It's stunning.
Yeah, I'm with you. Here's the memo. This is dated January 4th, 2021. It's a memorandum for Secretary of the Army. The subject, employment guidance for the District of Columbia National Guard. And I'll just read it. Keep in mind, this is 2 days before January 6th. And this is the Secretary of Defense speaking to the Army and the National Guard. Without my subsequent personal authorization, the D.C. National Guard is not authorized the following. And I'm going to insert the word "not" in each one of these bullet points. It's, because it's what it literally means. The D.C. National Guard may not be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or ballistic protection equipment such as helmets and body armor. The D.C. National Guard may not interact physically with protesters except when necessary in self-defense. The D.C. National Guard may not employ any riot control agencies. The D.C. National Guard may not share equipment with law enforcement agencies. The D.C. National Guard may not use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets to conduct ISR or incident awareness or assessment activities. The D.C. National Guard may not employ helicopters or any other air assets. The D.C. National Guard may not conduct searches, seizures, arrests, or any other similar law enforcement activity. The D.C. National Guard may not seek support from any non-D.C. National Guard units. And that was 2 days before the riot. It's just astonishing. Kate, thank you very much for that call and for pointing that out. Ron in Chicago. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Yes, with the decision about the Clean Air Act, does that mean in the near future that cars will not be coming with airbags, kill converters, seatbelts?
Conceivably, the requirement for airbags and seatbelts could be rolled back, too. I don't know if Congress ever put those things into law, or if those are or if those are regulations that came out of the National Highway Safety, Transportation Safety Board, or whatever it's called. Frankly, I just don't know off the top of my head, Ron. I'd have to look it up. But anything that is in law right now as the result of administrative action, in other words, as a result of a regulatory agency saying, we have examined this, we did the science, we published it, we had public comment, we went through all the hoops, and now we have published this as a law. Anything that falls into that category, arsenic, levels of arsenic in your water, levels of pollution from power plants, levels, all of these things are now subject to being overthrown or overruled by a lawsuit from an interested party. And if that lawsuit is successful, or when that lawsuit is successful, the only way to get those rules back is for Congress to pass them as a law. And good luck getting anything out of Congress. Ever since the Reagan Revolution, Congress has essentially been frozen when it comes to doing anything except tax cuts for billionaires. Ron, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Marty in Wixom, Michigan. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to reinforce the alarm bells you are ringing about this latest Supreme Court decision in the EPA. I've testified before Congress and before half a dozen state legislatures, and I can assure your listeners that legislators are absolutely unqualified and incapable of developing and passing regulations.
It's not their job. It's not what we elected them to do. I mean, if we knew that this was what Congress had to do, we'd start looking for PhDs to run for Congress.
Yeah, I mean, even if they were well-intentioned, which in many cases they are not, the legislative structure and process is incapable of developing regulations. I mean, it's just a ridiculous concept.
Yeah, well, it's now the law of the land. Marty, thank you for the call. Spot on, spot on. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls in just a moment. The legislative coup, the judicial coup, the rewriting of the rules of America. We're back to 1930 now. We're back before Franklin Roosevelt's presidency. In so many regards. Continues.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'll be right back with your phone calls. Stick around. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Jack in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Hey, so this recent Supreme Court ruling with the EPA, I mean, it's like you want to roll us back to, like, leaded gasoline and everything else. But the main reason I was calling is they had this recent Supreme Court ruling about the Miranda rights, which is absolutely troubling. So as we're going into July 4th, you have all these Republicans talking about freedom and liberty and everything else. But in this decision, they called it it was used, I think, like 50 in the decision. When I read it, it was like 50 plus times that they kept talking about the prophylactic. It is like a prophylactic, basically, ruling, which essentially safeguards specific rights that you do have. So it seems like the Supreme Court, the only time this Supreme Court, the only time that they're interested in talking about prophylactics are when they really want to suspend your rights or severely hamstring them. It's just insane.
Yeah, as
that
opposed
they would allow.
I'm sorry. Go,
that they would allow evidence to be admitted that, that that came down, a decision that came down, 64, was it Miranda versus Arizona?
Mm-hmm.
You have the right to remain silent, things like that. It's amazing that they could do that. And, you couple that with all the other decisions that they have with the Fourth Amendment, with the Border Patrol agent going into the house of that guy, not being able to sue federal agents when they, when they violate your Fourth Amendment
Beat him up and
rights.
trashed his house.
Exactly. And not only that, plus the ruling with the Sixth Amendment, where, now if you find new evidence and you can't, let's say that you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, but you're doing the right thing. You know what I'm saying? And you just happen to get caught, and you happen to get let's say you get thrown into, you get convicted, but you didn't do the crime, and you found new evidence years later. Well, you cannot now, with the latest ruling, you can't admit that evidence.
Right.
You can petition for it. You can petition, say, hey, I'm innocent, but without the evidence, it's toothless. What's it going to do? You're a convicted felon at this point.
Right, like if you're at your bank cashing a check and a bank robbery happens, and somebody thinks that you're participating with the robbers, you tip them off, or you looked at the guard the wrong way or something like that, and they haul you into court and they convict you and they send you to prison, and then it comes out after you're in prison that, hey, the bank has security cameras, or this guy over in the corner had his cell phone going. And here's the proof that you had nothing to do with robbing the bank. The Supreme Court has said, you're absolutely right, the Supreme Court has said you may not automatically be entitled to an appeal because of that new evidence.
It's just, it's disgusting.
We are looking at a fascist takeover of this country from the court.
It's insane. Exactly. And it's frightening. At this point now, it is frightening. When I try to tell some of this to my friends about these rulings, are like, well, hey, when are you going to get arrested? I'm like, it might not affect you, but it could affect people that you do know, or some of your family members that you do know, or people or friends that you might have that, get caught up, like you just said, and now that, now they're spending a life in prison.
Right, and now that you can't, now that it's almost impossible to sue the police, I mean, if you piss off the cop who lives down the street from you, you might be in trouble. Right, if you get,
you're going to be absolutely.
Yeah, for with these what do you call it, vengeance arrests. Jack, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 50 minutes past the hour. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Welcome back, 10 minutes before the hour. Don't know if you caught Joe Biden's press conference this morning during the NATO conference. But he reaffirmed our commitment to Ukraine. Said that we're sending another $800 million worth of weapons to them. Several other NATO countries said that they would do the same or similar. And you'll recall a week or so ago, I was explaining how Turkey was blocking the entrance. Turkey's a member of NATO. They're kind of the outlier. They're the only NATO country that, it's not really a democracy any longer. Erdogan has declared a state of emergency, and he's been ruling by fiat. But in any case, what I predicted was that Erdogan was going to get a pound of flesh because he can, NATO is a consensus organization. Everybody has to agree, 100%. Everybody has to vote the same way or nothing happens. And so when Sweden and Finland said that we'd like to become members of NATO, Turkey immediately said, oh, no, you don't. And I said, Erdogan wants something. I don't know what he wants, but I know that he wants something. Well, now we're finding out what he wants. He wants to stab the Kurds in the back. Sweden has been helping the Kurds. The Kurds are scattered among basically three countries: Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, and Syria, actually. And there's a lot of Kurdish refugees also in Turkey. And Erdogan, hates the Kurds and has been trashing the Kurds. And Sweden has been supporting the Kurds. And so basically Erdogan said, stop supporting the Kurds and I'll let you into NATO. And Sweden said, okay, we'll stop supporting the Kurds. So once again, Donald Trump stabbed the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds in the back. You'll recall they were giving the finger to our troops as we pulled out when Putin told Trump to get out of Syria, and Trump said, yes, sir, yes, sir. And he pulled all of our troops out of Syria and just turned the Kurds over to the tender mercies of the Russian army and the Syrian army. And here we go again. It's amazing. Gino in Oakdale, St. Paul, Minnesota. Am I saying your name right? And is it Oakdale or St. Paul?
Just outside of St. Paul, just to the east, about 10 minutes from Wisconsin. Ron Johnson, what a gift to the Democrats.
You think? You think he's going to lose?
Well, I'm pretty sure. But why don't we play every day that statement he made to that woman that got him on video? She was pretending to be a Trumpster, and she was complaining to him about how Trump got robbed from the election. And Ron Johnson told her that people voted down ballot, and they didn't vote for Trump. Right. And there was like 50,000. He said like 50,000 people did that.
Yep.
That's why Trump lost Wisconsin. But for months, Wisconsin's been going through all this phony audit stuff and all this. Why don't they play every day what Ron Johnson said to that lady?
Yeah. I don't know, but I get your sentiment and I agree with it. Gino, thank you for the call. Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, always good to talk to the reason in the sea of misconception.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that people really need to learn history, because if you really look at this fake statement by the Supreme Court that they're going back to originalism, they appear to be stopping no later than or earlier than 1821, because this was the beginning of the Second Great Awakening. And Thomas Jefferson was still alive, and he was appalled that religion was taking over multiple states.
Oh, yeah.
And people don't realize that this is not what the founders had in mind. And they keep saying, oh, no, we're going all the way back. Nope, they're stopping in the 1800s. They want a certain way of basically a religious state.
And they're hell bent on getting one. I'm with you, Tom. And in fact, the piece I published yesterday had a quote at the very end of it from Jefferson, and that was in a letter that I believe was written in the 1820s. Where he was saying, "Sing Tarantara, fools all." Absolutely, excellent point. Thank you, Tom. Robin in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Robin, what's up?
It's just this country is starting to look like a scorched earth. But, more than ever, Biden needs to get off his butt and appoint and pack the Supreme Court with 4 more justices.
Well, that's going to take an act of Congress.
Yeah, well, okay. In 1869, Congress set the number of Supreme Court justices at 9 to align with the 9 circuit courts. We now have 13 circuit courts. We are shorthanded on the Supreme Court.
Yep, I agree. I absolutely agree. And frankly, there's the binding the number of members of Congress or the number of members of the court to the number of courts itself is not a hard and fast rule. But when the Judiciary Act of 1796 or 97, it was the law that Marbury versus Madison in 1803 modified to, that's when the Supreme Court took all that power. That act established 6 Supreme Court justices and 3 circuit courts. So at that time, you had 2 justices for every court. In 1868, or I believe it was 69, but it was when Andrew Johnson left office and Ulysses Grant came in, Congress expanded the court back to 9. And, I'm not sure that the rationale was that there were 9 circuit courts. It may have been. I'd have to go back and look. But yes, it was certainly coincidental. And 13 is, in my mind, a minimum. I mean, you look at the Supreme Courts of most other countries, some of them have 15, 20, 25 members. There's a lot of business that the court can do. Robin, thank you for the call. They should do it the way that they do with regular circuit courts. You have enough extra members that you can pull out a 3-judge panel or a 6-judge panel, or you can have the whole, the whole thing. I mean, there are so many ways that we can make our government more rational and more well-functioning.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Microtrends Squared by Mark Penn. The first chapter, The Building Blocks of Change Today, The Power of Microtrends. We live in a microtrends world. It's driven by granular, often opposite patterns of human behavior that seem small but punch above their size. We've identified these powerful patterns as microtrends, and the world is full of them. Together they are the dots of a global impressionist painting that comes to life when you step back and look at it holistically. These forces have only become more impactful in recent years, and they've started to upend society. 10 years ago, when I first identified these patterns in change and microtrends, I saw a world of boundless opportunities. I was over-the-top optimistic about how microtrends would produce a new world of personalized products on our shelf, and how in Washington they would produce an even greater selection of fresh, first-rate political choices. Of course, that's not exactly what happened. Instead, the information age has given way to the disinformation age, in which fake information abounds. The nation founded on free speech is grappling with how to live with free speech in the era of the internet troll. The optimism around our economy faded with the unexpected crash of 2008, followed by a historically slow recovery over a decade. Only now is it recovering. Unparalleled consumer choice is leading not to the growth of more startups, but to the dominance of just a few internet companies, which are amassing more and more power on the basis of data gleaned from willing but unknowing consumers. And the older generations, who in their own youth led a rebellion, have now dug in their heels against the politics and culture of today's new generations. What makes the microtrend such a powerful tool in this moment is that it can unpack and explain changes that we're seeing that otherwise make no sense. On the surface, for example, the middle class can seem to be shrinking, and this is alarming. But it is only by digging deeper and seeing that education is driving more people into the upper classes that we can come to understand these overall statistics at a more molecular level. Often, two diametrically opposed trends are occurring at the same time, which would be invisible in the averages, but which leap out when understood as the result of a cauldron of microtrends. Today in politics, for example, there is no overall ideological shift. Instead, one group of moderates became more conservative and another group became more liberal, causing society to become both more liberal and more conservative at the same time, essentially canceling each other out. This increased polarization then produces even more gridlock and confusion. We can see similar tugs and pulls throughout society. While one group seeks more technology, another one wants to sit in the Amtrak quiet car. Some can't sit through a 6-second commercial. Others spend hours and hours binge-watching TV. Some live in a world of globalization, while others yearn for a return to greater nationalism. To explain all this, we've borrowed from Newtonian physics. For every trend, there is a counter-trend. It's human nature in the information age. Every move or desire in one direction seems to inspire a counter-move by another group in the opposite direction. For every radical group, there's a new conservative group. For every new product in mobile technology, there are those sticking to the flip phone. Only by understanding the complexity of these developments can we make sense of a world that seems senseless, confused, and even jumbled. While in 2007, microtrends allowed you to navigate the changes of the day, now microtrends squared lets you better understand the emerging chaos as the seesawing of opposite forces fighting for dominance in the social, political, and cultural worlds. In the last decade, technology was able to exploit and even conquer the world of microtrends with its ability to customize products and our lives based on AI and big data. But even as these attempts have transformed our lifestyles, they've also led to some serious unintended consequences that have further clouded society. Microtrends disentangles many of these shifts and lies at the source of many battles for power that have disrupted our world today. As you'll see throughout this book, those ongoing battles will result in some very unlikely winners, losers, and shifts in the overall power match of society. While the technology behind increased personalization of goods and services has been providing us with more choice in our daily life, we've instead been making fewer choices, burrowing into comfortable silos. We expected that the advances in our ability to customize goods and services would open us all up to a new world of never-ending experimentation. A decade later, exactly the opposite has occurred, and our society has become increasingly polarized, with people finding choices they like and picking them over and over again. In 2007, microtrends explained how the Starbucks economy had succeeded the Ford economy. In the Ford economy, you could have any color you wanted as long as it was black. The aim of industry was to mass produce products at the lowest possible cost, and that meant standardization of goods. But the new economy of the 21st century was moving starkly away from that model, instead providing consumers with any color they wanted. The Starbucks economy was based on creating greater value through customization, even of simple products like coffee and tea. People everywhere became more individualistic in their tastes and were rebelling from carefully mowed lawns and white picket fences. The marketplace responded to these trends by allowing people to have it their own way, and they did. The theory was that more choice would result in a happier and more satisfied group of consumers. Variety would open consumers up to new experiences, in many ways bringing us closer together, allowing us to mix, match, and try out all sorts of new options. Something rather surprising happened, however, as consumers got more choice. The book Microtrends Squared.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. I wanted to share with you a thought. I think I have to be very careful in how I word this. The question, will Liz Cheney be the one who saves the Republican Party? Now, originally I wanted to ask the question, will Liz Cheney be the one who saves the country? But obviously it needs to go way beyond Liz Cheney, and I have no illusions that Liz Cheney is anything other than your standard issue pre-Trump Republican. In other words, you know, not all that worried about climate change or anything else, and you know, there for the billionaires, and yes, let's have another war, and all that kind of stuff, right, that the Republicans are all about. But a day before yesterday, Liz Cheney gave a speech at the Reagan Library that got a standing ovation from a group of Republicans. And I think this is a moment that you and I and the rest of America are going to look back on probably next December, after the elections, after the November elections, maybe in 2005, after the 2004 presidential elections. I'm not sure how rapidly the Republican Party is going to change. But I think that this speech that Liz Cheney gave yesterday, or day before yesterday, at the Reagan Library, or maybe 3 days ago, was a major pivot point for the GOP. And yes, I realize, this is not a program for Republican listeners, generally speaking, although we love our Republican listeners. And as I've said many times and demonstrate every day, if you call in and say that you disagree with me or you want to challenge me or you're a Republican, I will put you on the air before anybody else. It's not like C-SPAN where you've got to wait in line with a separate phone number. You just go right to the front of the line. Because I think it's so important that we have these conversations or debates or whatever it may be. But right now, we've got a Republican Party, including its leadership, Ronna Romney McDaniel, who are completely in the thrall of, under the control of Donald Trump. Now, that is rapidly changing, and the Trump faction of the party, you know who the usual suspects are, particularly the most outspoken ones. A number of them are going to remain loyal to Trump for a while on the hope that maybe, when they get finally bounced out of Congress, Trump will give them a job or something. If they think Trump is going to be loyal to them, I've got a bridge to sell them in Brooklyn. But in any case, some of them are going to hang out with Trump, but many of them are going to shift to the next authoritarian, whether it's Ron DeSantis or Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley. We'll see. Rick Scott. There are a few possibilities. Kristi Noem, Greg Abbott. These are the ones that are at the top of the list of potential 2024 Republican presidential nominees, who are all authoritarians, as opposed to like Mitt Romney or Liz Cheney, good old-fashioned Republicans. And I say good in scare quotes. But I just want to share with you what she had to say. This is a truly extraordinary speech. She said, this is, again, at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, and it was to a room full of Republicans, many of them elected officials. She said, I know at this moment we are confronting a domestic threat that we have never faced before, and that is a former president who is attempting to unravel the foundation of our constitutional republic, and he is aided by Republican leaders and elected officials who have made themselves willing hostages to this dangerous and irrational man. So she starts out by laying out what she and the January 6th committee have found and are asserting. She goes on to say, some in my party are embracing former President Trump, and even after all we have seen, they are enabling his lies. Many urge that we do not confront Donald Trump, that we look away, and that is certainly the easier path. One only need look at the threats facing the witnesses that have come before our January 6th committee to understand the nature and magnitude of that threat. But to argue that the threat posed by Donald Trump can be ignored is to cast aside the responsibility that every citizen, everyone, must not do that. We cannot do that. So here she is saying we have to confront the reality of this problem. Then she goes on, she says, as the full picture is coming into view with the January 6th committee, it has become clear that the efforts Donald Trump oversaw and engaged in were even more chilling and more threatening than we could have imagined. As we have shown, Donald Trump attempted to overturn the presidential election and attempted to stay in office and prevent the peaceful transfer of power. He summoned the mob to Washington. He knew they were armed on January 6th. He knew they were angry, and he directed the violent mob to march on the Capitol in order to delay or prevent the counting of votes. So again, this is the sort of thing that you would pretty much expect from Liz Cheney, particularly given her position on the January 6th committee. But now it gets wild. Wild. I'm telling you, at the end of this speech, I'm going to read a few more sentences of it to you. At the end of this speech, she is basically claiming the mantle of feminism that Hillary Clinton holds. She said, the reality we face today as Republicans, as we think about the choice in front of us, we have to choose because Republicans cannot be loyal to both Donald Trump and the Constitution at this moment. And the audience breaks into applause. After the applause fades out, she says, we must not elect people who are more loyal to themselves or to power than they are to our Constitution. And again, the audience breaks into applause. And then she praises Cassidy Hutchinson for her bravery in testifying before the committee. And she finishes with this line. This is how she wraps up her speech. This is incredible. She says, this is Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney. She says, and I quote, "And I want to speak to every young girl watching tonight. The power is yours, and so is the responsibility. In our great nation, one individual can make all the difference, and each individual must try. There are no bystanders in a constitutional republic. And let me say this to the little girls and young women watching tonight. These days, for the most part, men are running the world, and it is really not going that well." And the crowd went nuts. Liz friggin' Cheney. The men are running the world, and it's not going that well. Is Liz Cheney going to be the one who saves the Republican Party? I don't know, but what I'm seeing from this speech and the audience response to it is that Donald Trump and the corrupt toadies that he surrounded himself with are toast. Toast with a capital T. They are toast. Now, I realize, what's the old saying, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. I think that was Mark Twain. But who knows? We'll see. But I am predicting that the Republican Party is, it has two choices. I mean, this is very much not unlike what happened with the Federalists in the 1820s. The Federalists had been so corrupted. John Adams was the second Federalist president and the last Federalist president. And John Adams, in the second year of his, or the beginning of the third year of his presidency, in 1798, passed the Alien Sedition Acts and threw the publishers of 18 newspapers in prison for writing op-eds against him. In prison. And the Federalists embraced that fascist idea of America, and by 1820, they no longer existed. They were replaced by the Whigs, who, were not anywhere near as neo-fascist as John Adams had become, but were still kind of, the power of big business and the northeastern elite of Wall Street and New York, basically, whereas the Democrats were the party of the slaveholding South. And the Whigs only lasted because the Whigs didn't take a position on slavery. The Whigs were all about, hey, who's going to make the most money for us? And Abraham Lincoln came along in 1856. The Republican Party had their first meeting, and I believe it was in Jackson, Michigan, in 1856. And Abraham Lincoln came along and said, no, we're gonna take a principled stand. We're going to establish a new political party, and that was the end of the Whigs. So, the Republican Party is part of this long lineage, and they have the choice of going the way of the Federalists and the Whigs and being replaced by another party. I mean, America needs a party on the right. I hate to say it, but we need a party on the right. We need to have, honest, enthusiastic, open, above board, but honest is the magic word here, debates on the issues. And you can't do that with single-party rule. Single-party rule always ends up corrupted. No matter how wonderful your party is, it could be nothing but Bernie Sanders in the House and Senate, Bernie clones everywhere. And if it had absolute power, if it was the only political power, it would become corrupt. History tells us that back to the Greeks. So we need a Republican Party. But a fascist Republican Party? A strongman Republican Party, a corrupt Republican Party, it is doing amazing damage to this country. Now, that said, there are those who are trying to, so you got Liz Cheney trying to reinvent the Republican Party as basically just kind of, the George Herbert Walker Bush Party or the Richard Nixon Party, the party of big business and great wealth. Then you got Tucker Carlson and Fox News trying to reinvent the Republican Party as a post-Trump party, but now a fascist Trump party, a fascist party. I'll tell you about that after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's 17 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I love your call screener today. Do you?
I do. It's my wife. You must have recognized her voice.
Yeah, I got talking to her just a little bit. Anyways, I'm calling about the Supreme Court decision on the EPA, and I think they're going to be in bigger trouble than they realize, quicker than they realize. The Bureau of Land Reclamation last week notified the western states that they have 60 days to come up with a plan to cut water usage coming out of the Colorado River by 2 to 4 million acre feet by next year. And if they don't come up with this plan within 60 days, the government is going to do it because they're projecting that they will be below the current levels within less than 2 years.
Right. Everywhere from Los Angeles to Phoenix, Arizona is going to be dry.
Exactly. Yeah. And if they don't start, and if the federal government can't start forcing the states to do something about it, then nothing's going to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
are you anticipating that somebody is going to sue the which agency did you say was doing that? The Bureau of Reclamation?
Yes. Well, I'll bet you that my full amount, $1, Tom, that somebody will.
Yeah. By the way, how are your? I know you've been selling T-shirts and bumpers, progressive swag online. How's that going? Yes. And what's the website again?
Okay, it's been going good, and I've been a little busy here in the last couple of weeks with the grandkids, so that's why I haven't called in. It's called End the Bribe System, and actually, I'd like to have people go there, and I'm trying to come up with an answer for every topic. I believe that every problem we have can be solved if we get money out of politics, and I'm trying to come up with an argument so people can do a quick search and say, oh, well, if whatever the subject is, here's why you're not getting what you want to get. And at the top of each of the endthebribesystem.com, there's a blue button, and on there that will take you over to the store, and you can get paraphernalia. My most recent one is a T-shirt saying "Abort the Court."
Very cool. I'm guessing this has not yet become a real business for you. It's more of a hobby right now?
Oh, it's always a hobby, and it probably will be. My basic plan is to take it up until the election, and then depending upon what happens at that time, I'll decide what I'm going to do. But, yeah, I just want us to get people out to vote. And I'm going to tell you, I wear these shirts and these bumper stickers, and I can't tell you how many times I have people come up and compliment me, and they're afraid to do it. And actually, I carry extra bumper stickers in my trunk, so I take the one off my car because they're all magnetic. I give it to the person. They're really happy. And then I just open my trunk and put a different bumper sticker on.
Now, is Oneonta a conservative or a progressive community?
Okay, we're in a purple area, but it's predominantly red.
Huh. And nobody shot at you or flipped you the bird or tried to stab you with a flagpole?
No, I've been fortunate, Once in a while, I'll have somebody look at me kind of odd or say something, and I'll try to talk to them. I actually try to get into a conversation with them because that's the whole reason for my endthebribesystem.com is, come up with ways when they say, well, look at gas prices. Well, here's why gas prices are like this,
That's right. You've got stickers to put on gas pumps, don't you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely got those, too. Yeah.
Very cool. So, endthebribesystem.com. Okay, Ziggy, thank you.
Okay.
And keep up the great work. Good talking to you. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Jessica Valenti publishes a newsletter called All in Her Head over at Substack.com, and just has an amazing compilation of bizarre Republican statements about rape and abortion. Michigan Governor Garrett Soldano earlier this year said that there should be no exceptions for rape in the abortion laws because the next fetus might be the next president. Missouri State Representative Barry Hovis said that most sexual assaults are actually consensual rapes. Texas Republican Representative Michael Burgess says that we should ban abortion because if you watch a sonogram, they have movements that are purposeful. If they're a male baby, they have their hand between their legs. They feel pleasure. That's right. Women should be legally banned from getting an abortion so that their male fetuses can masturbate, writes Jessica Valenti. It's absolutely bizarre. Idaho Republican Vito Barberi says you can do a gynecological exam by swallowing a camera. What planet do these people live on? A whole list of them is on a video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And so you will recall, for those of you who are longtime listeners to this program, that some years ago, Bernie Sanders went over to Denmark, and I believe he also went to Sweden. It's been, like I said, a lot of years. This was back when Bernie was a regular on our program. And he had meetings with the prime ministers of those countries. And in fact, we may have had one of those prime ministers on our show. We did, yeah, okay, Sean says we did. And Bernie called in and said, okay, I'm in Denmark, and let me tell you about this. And we had this conversation about, how does your health system work? And how, people are unionized, how does that work? And what's your minimum wage? And can people go to college for free and all that kind of stuff? So Bernie was basically arguing that America should learn from the experience of Denmark and Finland. Or Denmark and Sweden, I think it was, whichever of the countries where Bernie was. I know Denmark was one of them. Similarly, Michael Moore made this movie, Where to Invade Next, which, if you haven't seen it, make this one of your commitments to yourself for the 4th of July weekend, because Michael Moore is, one of my heroes. He's a fellow Michigander. He's a brilliant guy. And he made this brilliant movie, Where to Invade Next, where he travels around. His premise is, when America wants something, it invades a country, right? We wanted Iraq's oil, so we invaded Iraq. So where should we invade next? Well, what do we want? Well, how about if we wanted a national health care system? Let's invade Denmark. What if we want to clean up our prisons and go to a policing system that actually works? Let's invade Norway. What if we want to have family leave, paid family leave? Let's invade Italy. And he goes around Europe mostly. And I'm pretty sure it was all Europe. I could be wrong. It's been years since I saw the movie. And interviews average people and interviews politicians and by way of teaching Americans how other countries work so we can learn those lessons. Well, it turns out Tucker Carlson is doing the same thing over at Fox News. The difference is, instead of going to countries that are highly democratic, small d democratic, that are highly progressive, small p progressive, that are functioning democracies, Tucker Carlson is going to strongman dictatorships. He has embraced and spoken well of Putin and Russia. He has gone to Hungary and did his show from Hungary and had strongman Viktor Orban on his program. And now this week he's down in Brazil, where he just did an interview with Jair Bolsonaro, another Trump. Proto-Trump, another right-wing neo-fascist who is aggressively trying to turn his country into a neo-fascist state. So I'm suggesting that Democrats need to be doing the same. I would love to see, and now, we've done our show from Denmark, we've done our show from Sweden, we've done our show from Iceland, we've done our show from a bunch of progressive countries and had politicians from those countries on. It all lives on our archives over at thomhartmann.com and on our YouTube channel if you want to find them. But I would like to see more of the media doing what Tucker Carlson is doing, only doing it instead of going to, suck up to people like Putin and Bolsonaro and Orban. Go and visit countries like Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Germany and France and Spain and Italy and find out what they're doing, or Canada. if you don't want to fly across the ocean and find out how they're doing what they're doing. How does the Medicare system in Canada work? Let's get some of these stories out, because Fox News and the oligarchs who own, the billionaire oligarchs who own Fox News, the Murdoch family, are doing everything they can to turn this country into another autocratic neo-fascist regime. We need to be pushing back and pointing out that there are alternatives to turning America into Brazil or Hungary or Russia.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls after this. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Our book for the book report today. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, A Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhuburi. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race, and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. And welcome back. Amazing. Just absolutely amazing. I just wanted to play a little clip for you, a little bit of audio here. This is from Fox News. But I want to preface it with an explanation, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. I was going to say we're all familiar with abusive husbands. Many of us are actually not. I've known one couple where I would say the husband was probably abusive. But, you know, we all know the story. And the story is, you know, dad beats up mom, and then mom comes out and makes excuses to the kids about why dad was upset, right? Oh, I shouldn't have upset him. I shouldn't have, you know, served that meal cold, or I put too much salt in the sauce or whatever, and that's why he had to beat me up. In other words, you have the abuser, and then you have the enabler. And this doesn't just happen in homes. This happens in politics. And the abuser in this case is Donald Trump. He abused our nation. And he showed his violence, his tendency toward violence, his love, his abusive nature when he threw that plate against the wall and shattered it, and ketchup was draining down the wall of the White House dining room that Cassidy Hutchinson testified about. So now come the enablers. This is a clip from Fox News.
That the president, just, you know, knowing what we've seen, observing him over the years, if he got angry that he might throw his lunch. I'm not sure. It's obviously a very dramatic detail, and the way that she describes it is. But I'm not sure that any of this is wholly out of character with the Donald Trump and the President Trump that people came to know over the years. And there's a lot of people out there who obviously shared his feelings of frustration over the course of those days. The problem was that they couldn't back it up with anything in the courts, and they couldn't back it up with
quack. So yeah, Donald Trump is abusive, but we understand, right? We understand. Okay, let's pick up your phone calls here. Larry in Blackfoot, Idaho. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm wondering if there's anything in the Constitution under equal rights that would affect the Supreme Court. if it isn't balanced, how can they come up with a decision that isn't biased?
Well, the Supreme Court has never been balanced. It's always been biased in one direction or the other, toward progress or more conservative. The only real reference in the Constitution that immediately comes to mind about equality or equal rights is the 14th Amendment. And I don't see how the 14th Amendment could be used to change the composition of the court, if that's where you're going.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
No, this is just up to Congress. I mean, the court is a political body. It has been since it was created. I mean, there were debates and fights over the court literally during the founding generation, and there have been ever since. The court arguably started the Civil War with the Dred Scott decision. The court has been at the center of a lot of what you could call political activity over the years, and it continues to be. And I think we just have to acknowledge it and let our far more political body, or at least theoretically more political body, explicitly political body, that's the word I'm looking for, the House of Representatives and the Senate, Congress, let them expand the court so that we can unpack it, undo the damage that was done by Mitch McConnell refusing to allow President Obama to have his nominee, and then rushing through Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Amy Coney Barrett before Ruth Bader Ginsburg was even in the ground. We just need to expand the court. Larry, thank you for the call. Diana in Marietta, Georgia. Hey, Diana. How's my old stomping grounds doing?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. First-time caller.
Well, thank you.
I was going to talk about how the Democrats really need to make use of their power. I've been concerned with that. And also, because of that, the voters need to make a better effort in the primary season to really start nominating some more progressive Democrats who are going to be willing to do something like overturn Citizens United and pack the court and all these things.
I'm with you. You know how that happens, though, Diana, is progressives need to get inside state Democratic parties and county Democratic parties, because that's where these nominations come from.
I do agree. And just to support my statement, I wanted to point out, and I know you know this, but a lot of listeners don't, is that there was a brief time in Obama's first term when we did have a supermajority, after Al Franken was sworn in and before Teddy Kennedy died, when we had the supermajority for just a brief time, and we really didn't do nearly enough with it. We didn't codify Roe v. Wade. We didn't do anything about ERA. We didn't do anything about public option or DACA. All those things they should have had special sessions and just legislated like fools while they had that majority. And maybe even that would have been the time to talk about having RBG, retire and put somebody in when they knew they could do that. And now, of course, that time is gone, but the Democrats need to be stronger about doing things like overruling the Senate parliamentarian, firing her if they have to. The GOP certainly would do that. I think Bush did that during his term to get something.
Did we have 60 votes in the Senate? I thought that we just had just a little more than a simple majority, and that's why, for example, Joe Lieberman was able to blow up the public option for the ACA, because I thought that was passed through reconciliation.
I looked it up once in the past, and I believe there was a period of about 2 months when we had 60 votes.
Huh. I'd have to go back and look, but I'll take your word for it.
I researched that in the past, and that was found. And then it was lost when Robert Byrd was out. He was hospitalized for a period of time. So it was a really brief period that we had it, but we just didn't do enough with it.
Yeah.
And I think
hopefully lesson learned, right?
That means that we need to get, like you said, more involved and getting people in the Democratic Party at the low level so we can push things up. And that's always what Bernie pushed too, bottom up.
Yep.
That's what we're going to have to do. But we're going to have to stop. And I better vote for this neoliberal corporatist because they can get elected. Okay, yeah, that might be the thing you have to do in the general election, but not in the primary. And people aren't owning their power in the primary enough.
I agree. And frankly, I don't think enough progressives are getting inside the party. And this is where it all starts. This is how the radicals took over the Republican Party. Steve Bannon's on the radio every day promoting this. And we need to be doing the exact same thing. Diana, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I'm looking up stuff about the EPA as you were on the air, And it goes back to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. That was like the threshold legislation that set everything up for the EPA, that followed consolidation of various environmental laws. And in this document, it's only about a 7-page document, very quick to read if anybody wants to look it up. They have what they call the stated purposes of the National Environmental Policy Act. And it goes on and is very clear about what they want the federal government to do. I can just go over very quickly. It's to declare a national policy which will encourage productive and enjoyable harmony between... Oh, boy, my phone just zipped out. Could you... I can't believe somebody's calling me and my phone.
That's quite all right, Kathy. It's gone. But basically, and in fact, it's better that you just tell us, from your own recollection rather than read it, because when people read things, people tend to zone out.
Yeah, really. It's a wonderful, very brief document. It states exactly what they want the federal government to do.
Right.
And it's about harmony and taking care of things that are bad for us and keeping people healthy and all that stuff in the environmental sense. So then out of that came a lot of other things, the consolidation. There was a whole bunch of different environmental laws. And then the EPA came about. Nixon signed that into law like in July of 1970 for the EPA. So all of this stuff has been laid out. And what this court is doing, they're not nullifying a regulation. They are nullifying the laws that set up environmental protections.
That's correct. They are essentially spaying and neutering the EPA.
Yeah, because Congress already voted on this stuff.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct.
They already voted on it, and this is the thing that they did the same thing with OSHA when it came to the Biden mandate, for the COVID protections. They said, you don't have the authority. Well, nobody, who does?
Right, exactly. Well, they're saying Congress does, and this is a, as they say, a dark day. Kathy, thank you. Thank you for the call. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
First of all, I have a solution, and then I'd like to make the case that the Supreme Court is acting like organized crime and should be RICO'd. The possible solution is, can't Congress just charge the EPA, say, go study methane, go study CO2, use your scientists, and report back to us? That's a potential solution.
Well, hang on just a second. Let me answer that. Under my understanding of this Supreme Court ruling, I think you're right, David, that the way it's going to have to happen is the EPA is going to have to say, okay, here's all the rules that we want, and then they transmit that to the House of Representatives and say, make this a law. The House of Representatives makes it a law, passes it, it goes to the Senate passes it, and of course that's where it's going to die.
Right. Unless we take control.
That's correct.
The Supreme Court acting as organized crime. In 2001, the Italian Supreme Court, heavily Catholic, heavily influenced by the mafia, ruled that influence peddling is not a crime.
Right, we call it lobbying. We've had similar rulings.
The case involved 88 pounds of fish given to expedite legal proceedings to the director of a.
Oh, really? So it was explicit bribery, not just influence.
Yeah, 88 pounds of fish was given to expedite legal proceedings to the director of a civil court. So you keep asking, where did Kavanaugh get his money? What are Clarence Thomas and his wife up to? And why are they doing the will of the robber barons 2.0 and not the will of the people, because it's organized crime and they need to be RICO'd?
Yeah. Well, I think the chances of the RICO laws being used against the Supreme Court are less than, probably less than 1/100 of 1%. But I share your sentiment, David. I certainly do. And there seems to be something in common with today's Supreme Court and that old Italian Supreme Court. David, thank you for that little bit of history. It's fascinating. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we are still here. By the way, Reverend Barber is supposed to be with us at the top of the hour. Sean just got a call from one of his people saying that he just got arrested and he's being processed. So if he can get out of jail in the next 15 minutes, we'll have him on the air. If not, it might be a little later in the hour, and it might be bumped back to next week or, the next time that he's available. So we'll keep you up to date. But Reverend Barber, one of our favorite people, one of the regulars on our program, and we're looking forward to it. And to hearing about what he got arrested about and all that sort of stuff. Jim in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Hey, Supreme Court is on my mind.
Yeah, you and the rest of the world, I think.
I tell you, I feel like I've just been beat up. Left hook, right jab, haymaker to the breadbasket. That's, wow.
I'm with you.
It's just, I can just imagine a dystopian vision where the executive just, gives up, abdicates, Congress goes on vacation, and the Supreme Court just rules the land. 9 unelected folks.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the deal, full disclosure. I took a challenge a couple of years ago. I got involved with the Democratic Party here in Washington County. It was PCP. And I'm on my 3rd term.
So you're a precinct committee person?
I am.
Good on you, Jim. So tell me about it.
No, I think that was a very good advice, and I thank you for it.
You're welcome. How's it working out?
Yeah. Oh, it's working out pretty well. But, I always hear this talk about the Republicans misusing the word Democrat. It's a noun. They wanted to make it something else. I think it ought to be a verb.
Democratic, you mean?
No, Democrat. Use it as a verb. And because the other day, now I've got a volunteer gig too, so
give me an example in a sentence.
I will.
Okay.
The other day, I went out to my volunteer gig and I said, "Dear, I'm off to go Democrat. We have a lot of work to do, and it's going to take a lot of Democrating to get it done."
There you go. Okay. I like it.
So that's my take on things. Just a little levity, maybe, in this crazy world of hurt.
Great one. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Lafayette in Hortamilitia, California. Am I saying that right?
That's right, Tom. And, your show is a island of rationality in a sea of ideological insanity.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We try.
I like to say there's a whole lot of treason going on, and I'm going to rule under the Fifth Amendment as a court of militia that any of the judicial appointments of a traitor, their jurisdiction is a nullity and doesn't count. And thank God we have dissenting opinions, because the dissenting opinions, you could make a book out of it, because this is the first president to commit treason. Nixon and Reagan did too. You could throw out their judicial appointments and look at what the real law of the real America would be.
Mm-hmm. And, for example?
Well, I don't know. That's any of the decisions, the judges that were appointed by a treasonous, like Nixon. I learned that from your show, that Nixon committed treason. I knew Reagan was doing it in Iran.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so why it's poisoned fruit? I mean, police can't use evidence.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I get what you're saying, yeah.
It's a crime. It shouldn't be.
The problem is they're already sworn in.
It shouldn't be the result of a crime.
Yeah, but they're already sworn in. I share your sentiment, Lafayette, and agree with it, sentimentally, as it were. But legally, there's not a chance, unfortunately. Thanks a lot for the call. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Kendall in Oakland, California says here, you disagree with me, Kendall. My apologies for not putting you on immediately. I didn't catch that until just now. I see you've been on hold for 8 minutes. My apologies. What's up?
No, I don't disagree with you. I think you are going to expand the Supreme Court. My question is, how are you going to prevent us Republicans from doing the exact same thing? And it goes back and forth until eventually every living human being in the United States is on the Supreme Court.
Well,
I'm sure you have a plan for that.
Sure. What you're laying out is the slippery slope argument. And the slippery slope argument is usually BS. Usually you start out with something that, is well-intentioned and yes, you can extend it, like, hey, let's give everybody Social Security. This was the argument the Republicans made back in 1935 when they were fighting Social Security. Well, if you start giving people checks, what's going to stop those people from voting for more and more money until finally you bankrupt the entire country? And what happens,
isn't it?
Well, no, it's not what happened. What happens is with the slippery slope argument that there is this middle ground of a moment of rationality. You start out going down a particular road that could end up in a bad place, as you just described, or as I just described with Social Security. And then you hit the point where the solution is actually working, and there's a broad consensus that it's working, and it pretty much stays there.
I've got a hypothetical question for you. There's been all kinds of threats to members of the court. Well, let's say, heaven forbid, that multiple Supreme Court members get assassinated, and Biden would be able to fill those seats, and you'd have control of the courts. Would you be in favor of pardoning whoever assassinated those Supreme Court justices?
That is an insane question, Kendall. That is an absolutely. I'm going to cut you off at that point. I mean, even talking about that is insane. Almost as insane as saying that everybody in America is going to end up on the Supreme Court. The simple reality is, yes, there have been threats. There have been two. The first was 2 years ago when a man went to a federal judge. Her son opened the front door. He pulled out a gun and he shot him right between the eyes, killed him, killed her son. The police came. She barricaded herself in the house. He wasn't able to get to her. They came. They arrested him. And when they arrested him, they found that he had detailed all the details of Sonia Sotomayor, where she lived, and an explicit and detailed plan. He had been casing her house. He was going to assassinate her next. Immediately, Congress, in the House of Representatives, they passed legislation to provide some protection to Sotomayor and the other members of the Supreme Court. This is 2 years ago. But when it went to the Senate, Rand Paul put a hold on it. He blocked it. And so, because it was just a liberal member of the court who was being threatened with death, the Republicans refused to go along with doing anything. Then, a couple of months ago, a schizophrenic guy, a mentally ill fellow, drove to Washington, D.C. with some guns in the back of his car and gets near Brett Kavanaugh's house. And then he calls the police. And he says, I'm hearing voices in my head telling me to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. I'm at the corner of J and 19th or wherever he was. And the police come over, and he's like, I need help. The police come over, they arrest him. He's undergoing psychiatric evaluation as we speak. They take away his guns. He never got to Kavanaugh's house. Whether he was a real threat or not is problematic. But because it was a right-wing Supreme Court justice, within 2 days, the Republicans had pushed through that same legislation that the Republicans were blocking when it was just a liberal Supreme Court justice being threatened. So, sad, but if we have to talk about, and you brought up the subject, threats against the Supreme Court, that's all, to the best of my knowledge, those are the only two threats that there have been. But the fact that there is razor wire around the court right now should tell you something. When a government agency has to surround its building with razor wire, just like, Donald Trump did the same thing with the White House when he was there. Now, most of those barricades are down now, but I mean, it's a sign of a failing democracy, frankly. Lee in Sepulveda, California. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is your conversation about fascism, and I'd like to say where it came from. It came from the original compromises to first the Declaration of Independence and then to the Constitution, but especially to Madison's Bill of Rights. Those compromises are what have led us to fascism. And I'd like to say another thing, since you've been quoting you and others have been quoting Jefferson. He said, the greatest good we can do our country is to heal our party divisions. Now, if we made public those compromises, if we educated our nation as to those compromises and see what they have done.
Well, there were two things that when Jefferson was in France, he wrote a letter to Madison and said, these must be in the Bill of Rights. One that never made it to the Bill of Rights. One was that there's no standing army during time of peace. And the other was that corporations may not have monopolies. You know, that there may not be monopolies in commerce was his phrase. And both of those never made it into the Bill of Rights. And had they made it into the Bill of Rights, I think we'd be in a very different world, Lee. They did kind of compromise on Jefferson's demand that there not be a standing army during time of peace. That's why Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress can only appropriate money for the Army for a 2-year period. Every 2 years since the founding of the Republic, Congress has had to decide whether we want to continue to have an Army. We'll be right back.
You're listening.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I've, known about this book, read little pieces of it for decades. I mean, it's the classic work on totalitarianism. It's long and there's a lot of words in it, but for this moment, Elliot Lustig was tweeting recently about Donald Trump. This is back when Donald Trump was talking about 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voting, right? And he said, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origin of Totalitarianism, provides a helpful guide for interpreting the language of fascists. She noted how decent liberals of 1930s Germany would fact-check the Nazis' bizarre claims about things like Jews as if they were meant to be factual. What they failed to understand, Arendt suggests, is that the Nazi Jew-hating was not a statement of fact, but a declaration of intent. So when someone would blame the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I, naive people would counter by saying, there's no evidence of that. What the Nazis were doing was not describing what was true, but what would have to be true in order to justify what they planned to do next. So did 3 million illegals cast vote in the election? Clearly not, but fact-checking is just a way of playing along with their game. What Trump is saying is not that 3 million illegals voted. What he's saying is, I'm going to steal the voting rights of millions of Americans. So that's kind of a contemporary frame for this book. So let's read from the book itself. Here, this is from page 348. And she's talking about totalitarian movements and how they use propaganda, how they communicate with the public, and the difference between terror and propaganda, the kind of terror that they can inculcate by just kind of randomly arresting people. Pretty much everybody's committed some kind of crime at some point, right? Arresting people, and on the one hand, that's the terror, or convincing the people. These totalitarian movements use socialism and racism by emptying them of their utilitarian content, the interests of a class or a nation. The form of infallible protection in which these concepts were presented has become more important than their content. The chief qualification of a mass leader has become unending infallibility. He can never admit an error. The assumption of infallibility, moreover, is based not so much on superior intelligence as on the correct interpretation of the essentially reliable forces in history and nature, forces which neither defeat nor ruin can prove wrong because they're bound to assert themselves in the long run. Mass leaders in power have one concern which overrides all utilitarian consideration: to make their predictions come true. The Nazis did not hesitate to use, at the end of the war, the concentrated force of their still intact organization to bring about as complete a destruction of Germany as possible, in order to make true their prediction that the German people would be ruined in case of defeat. The propaganda effect of infallibility, the striking success of posing as a mere interpreting agent of predictable forces, has encouraged in totalitarian dictators the habit of announcing their political intentions in the form of prophecy. The most famous example is Hitler's announcement to the German Reichstag in January 1939, quote, "I want today once again to make a prophecy. In case the Jewish financiers succeed one more in hurling the people into a world war, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe," end of quote. Translated into non-totalitarian language, this means, I intend to make war and I intend to kill the Jews of Europe. Similarly, Stalin, in the great speech before the Central Committee of the Communist Party in 1930, in which he prepared the physical liquidation of intra-party right and left deviationists, described them as representatives of dying classes. This definition not only gave the argument its specific sharpness, but also announced in totalitarian style the physical destruction of those whose dying out had just been prophesied. In both instances, the same objective is accomplished. The liquidation is fitted into a historical process in which man not only suffers, or does or suffers what, according to some immutable law, is bound to happen anyway. As soon as the execution of the victims has been carried out, the prophecy becomes a retrospective alibi. Nothing happened but what has already been predicted. It does not matter whether the laws of history spell the doom of the classes and their representatives, or whether the laws of nature exterminate all those elements, democracies, Jews, Eastern subhumans, the Untermenschen, or the incurably sick. They are not fit to live anyway. Incidentally, Hitler, too, spoke of dying classes that ought to be, quote, eliminated without much ado, end quote. This method, like other totalitarian propaganda methods, is foolproof only after the movements have seized power. Then all debate about the truth or falsity of a totalitarian dictator's prediction is as weird as arguing with a potential murderer about whether his future victim is dead or alive, since by killing the person in question, the murderer can provide prompt proof of the correctness of his statement. The only valid argument under such conditions is promptly to rescue the person whose death has been predicted. Before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such, for, in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. The assertion that the Moscow subway is the only one in the world is a lie only so long as the Bolsheviks have not the power to destroy all the others. In other words, the method of infallible prediction, more than any other totalitarian propaganda device, works. In the book, Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
The book, Entrepreneurial Nation, by Ro Khanna, who is now a member of Congress, at the time the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, looking at my call screener here, I see Reverend Barber is not on the line. We had blocked off this period for him to call in. His person called Sean about, 30 minutes ago, 20, 30 minutes ago, and said he was getting arrested at the moment, and he would call in as soon as he gets processed. So this hour, hopefully he can get through it within the hour, and we'll put him on as soon as he calls in. But for the moment, we don't have Reverend Barber. It's you and me. So let's continue our conversations about the news of the day. There's an awful lot going on, and maybe a little bit of a anything goes Friday a day in advance. Ferris in Hollywood, California. Hey, Ferris, what's on your mind today?
Good day, Tom. Let me hope that I can make it more valuable for your listeners to hear me instead of the guest who was scheduled, Reverend Someone.
Reverend Barber is not a Reverend Someone. He is an amazing man. He runs the Poor People's Campaign. He inherited from Martin Luther King.
Sure. I appreciate your format, especially. I like the noises you're making, but your format is exceptionally good. And as you provide your listeners the courtesy of playing things in real time as you're talking about them, things like from the ladies on the Foxes on Fox News Channel, when they say something, you play it. And that's very helpful. Just a quick credential before I go. I'm the world's #1. The point I want to make has to do with the 19th Amendment.
Thank you.
But I'm world's #1 most frequently heard and most widely heard caller broadcaster in talk radio and talk shows.
So you're a chronic talk show caller.
I am world's #1 most widely heard and most frequently heard. Not the best. I'll tell you who the best is. It's Kim from Norcon, Connecticut.
Okay.
But I am the most frequently heard, the most widely heard.
All right, so Ferris, what did you call about today other than to claim your bragging rights?
No, don't take it that way. I'm an Army intelligence officer, highly educated, highly informed.
I didn't mean it to diminish you at all.
That's fine.
I honor that. A good friend of mine became a talk show host by being a regular caller.
Sure.
Lionel, he's...
Yeah, sure. Now, what I wanted to point out is ask you to play for your listeners, give them the courtesy of Rush Limbaugh's broadcast briefly, part of it on 7/3/12, repeat July 3/12, in which he explained clearly why it all started to go downhill when women got the right to vote. And that's a fact that most of us conservative, including many, many, many women, understand, including led by Ann Coulter on the female side. But Limbaugh explained, and if you Google the two following words, Limbaugh suffrage, all you listeners out there, Google Limbaugh suffrage and hear a very clear and concise, as Limbaugh was wont to do.
So you're arguing, Ferris, that women should not be allowed to vote, that we should repeal the 19th Amendment.
No, here's what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that you're an outstanding host and that you should play for your listeners in his own voice. So you Google it up and you play it for your listeners.
Okay. Ferris, thanks a lot. Frankly, I don't need advice on how to run the show. Tim in Jackson, Wyoming. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm going to watch that Michael Moore documentary over the weekend.
It is brilliant. Where to Invade Next. It is so worth watching.
I can't wait. And along those lines, I'm in Wyoming and I haven't been here long, but when you talk about, I've heard you talk about, the Republican idea that they basically went into these low populated rural states, bought up all the media for, a couple of decades now, and have been shoving propaganda down their throats for the last 40 years. Wyoming is the least populated state in the country. I have not been here long, but there is outdoor recreation like you wouldn't believe. And on top of it, there's no state income tax. So my argument, my idea, I guess, would be, we need some liberal or progressive companies to come in. Look, Wyoming only has 569,000 people, something like that.
Yeah.
In the last election, there were only 100, according to Wikipedia, in the last election, there were only 196,000 registered Republicans. 196,000. That's a small town. So let's invade Wyoming. These
I'm with you, Tim. It was in the 70s, in the late 70s, early 80s, that the Republicans put together this program to target low-population states. I'd have to go back and look to see if Wyoming was one of them, but I'm sure it was. But states that were, by and large, Democratic states. Certainly Iowa was one of them. There was a number of states that were consistently voting Democratic. And in states like Wyoming, media is really cheap. You can buy advertising really cheap. You can buy radio stations really cheap. You can buy television stations. Yeah, you've got a bunch of right-wing stations on the air there in Wyoming. Some progressive needs to buy some radio stations, particularly you got two big cities, right? Cheyenne and what's the other one? Rawlins?
Laramie, maybe.
Laramie. Yeah, thank you. Pick up a couple of radio stations. Start flipping the state blue. I mean, people respond to the data that they get. And if the only data that they're getting is supporting a right-wing point of view, surprise, surprise, you get a red state.
And not only that, I mean, let's get some progressive companies to come out here, set up some warehouses somewhere. I mean, you know, all the people in California that the cost of living's just gone through the roof. Hey, you guys can come out here. You know, we don't have any state income tax, and we got plenty of outdoor recreation. Get some progressive companies to get some people to move out here.
And housing is not that expensive.
And it's not, right? Right. So,
yeah, no,
anyway, let's invade Wyoming. That's it.
There you go. Okay, Tim. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to the program on Sirius XM. Alvin in Chicago. Hey, Alvin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing today? I love your show.
Thank you, Alvin.
The reason I'm calling is, okay, the Republican Party, I'm 61 years old, and since the 80s, since Ronald Reagan, they have the same game plan. They haven't changed their game plan. They'll tell the Democrats, we're about to hit you in the mouth. Then the Democrats act shocked when they get hit in the mouth.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you.
And they have no strong plan. Now, I work, I can't tell where I work. But anyway, I work with a lot of young people, you know, in their 20s and 30s. And I tell you, and I'm more liberal than a lot of them, you know, because I'm for what we need, health care, free college education. I said, you all need to get out and vote. You all need to change this.
Yeah.
You know, but, and then, okay, you let these, and I'm not saying, okay, well, I'll say it like this. I consider myself older. And so you let old people dictate what's going to happen in this country.
Mm-hmm.
I said, because it was told to me sometimes we stay in these positions too long. We don't give the youth a chance.
Yeah.
And it's time for blood in the Democrat Party because Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, as far as I'm concerned, need to go. They don't fight hard enough.
Well, I think Nancy has done a hell of a job, and she is a fighter, but I'm with you on Schumer.
She is. I agree. She is a fighter, definitely more so than
She's
Schumer.
gotten a lot done. Did you see what she did this week? You know, the Archbishop in San Francisco said, oh, you're in favor of abortion. I'm not going to give you communion. She hops on a plane and goes to Rome and hangs out with the Pope and gets communion in the Vatican.
Well, you're right. I did see that.
That's a woman who's kicking ass.
People like Chuck Schumer need to go. And so you want to call us mentioned about when President Obama was in office. We did have a supermajority. And I know I love Obama, but he didn't do enough because you had the opportunity to do things.
Well, he has sort of had a supermajority. I mean, he had 58 votes plus 2 independents, Joe Lieberman and Bernie Sanders. And Lieberman was not. I mean, Lieberman was a sellout. Lieberman took over $1 million from the insurance industry, and then he was the vote that sabotaged the public option, which would have, you know, opened the door for Medicare for all. So, you know, and he only had that supermajority for 70 days, and during that time he passed the Affordable Care Act, which is a huge deal. So
I agree with that part, but you know, the thing about it, I wish the Democrats stopped trying to sing Kumbaya.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
No, it's time. Yeah. We are. This is war. You know, we are at a point. We are in a time where we have. I was going to say we need to declare. The Republican Party declared war on America in 1980.
Yes.
With
right.
with the Reagan Revolution. I mean, you know, that's the way it is. Alvin, thank you. Very, very well said. Oh, hey, Robin, I'm sorry, we're hitting a break. Let me put you on hold, and I'll pick you up on the other side of the break. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Stick around. And we're also waiting on the possibility that Reverend Barber will get out of jail earlier than we thought, and we'll get him on the air with the Poor People's Campaign. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Dan in Oxford, Alabama. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Tom, after what you have seen on the January 6th hearings so far, do you personally think that Donald Trump is guilty of treason?
I think he's guilty of sedition. Treason, if you want to get technical, treason requires you to be at war. And so it's basically aligning yourself with the enemy during times of war. Attempting to overthrow your government is sedition. So I would say he's guilty of sedition. I have no problem calling it treason, Dan. I think it's morally treason.
No, I agree. I'm a former Marine, a Vietnam veteran, and to me it's treason.
Yeah.
you know, I will tell you this, you know, living in the South as a Democrat, you know, in a red state, deeply red, I have found a way to shut the right-wingers up about Donald Trump, and I can do it without mentioning a name.
Okay.
This is what I tell them. I took an oath in 1967 as a United States Marine to uphold the Constitution and the democracy of this country. Under no circumstances, you know, I took that oath to defend our Constitution and against all enemies, both domestic and foreign. And I usually highlight the word domestic. Mm-hmm. And I tell them I will not support a traitor to this country for any public office, but I don't mention any names. They shut up and they will not say a thing back to me.
Because they know.
Yeah, they know. They don't want to accept it.
Yep, but they
know
don't
want
what's
to
going
accept
on.
it.
Yeah, Dan.
But they know what they're beginning to see what's going on. I think.
Yeah, I get it, Dan. That's brilliant. Dan, thanks so much for sharing that story with us and for the conversation and for watching us on Free Speech TV down there in Oxford, Alabama. I do appreciate it. James in Portland, Oregon. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. So I got a question. Chris Hayes, MSNBC, brought this point up, and I'd like to get your opinion. Now, Meadows had some kind of encryption phone or something that he was contacting the war room.
He was using. I think he was using Telegram. He was using one of those encrypted messaging apps.
Now, if they could tap in and get that message, he's talking to in the war room with the Proud Boys there.
Yeah.
And Giuliani was there, and the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
That's my understanding. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, you got a direct connection from Meadows contacting them, and Meadows is working for Trump.
Right.
So, and these guys are...
Well, and Trump had hosted these guys in the White House just a few weeks before.
Well, they're pleading guilty, half these guys.
This is going to be... This is probably going to be the last of the... You know, when the January 6th hearings, there's I think 3 or 4 more to come, and this is probably going to be the topic of one of the last ones, James, because it's going to be the nail in the coffin. But I'm with you. This is very, very clear proof, if it all pans out, that Donald Trump was planning to violently overthrow the government of the United States. And if that's not treason, it's at least sedition, and that is a 20-year felony. James, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, taking your calls. John in Staten Island, New York. Hey, John, it says here you disagree with me. You go to the front of the line. What's up?
Oh, hello. I just heard that commercial. It's pretty funny. How about the $22 billion they lost under Trump in the oil industry?
I don't hear the commercials, John, so I don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, what'd you call about?
All right, so now the President of the United States did not offer Nancy Pelosi 20,000 National Guard troops 3 days before, just before this happened, or a week before it happened. That never happened. Because if he did offer Nancy Pelosi the troops, the National Guard, that means when you were asking the question before, who was it that called off the National Guard? It was Nancy Pelosi. That's what you're looking for. You found her.
John, Nancy
because
Pelosi.
The president.
John, just relax for just a second. Nancy Pelosi has no control over the National Guard. The National Guard is the D.C. National Guard answers directly to the president. In every other state, the National Guard answers to the governor. You had the governor, the Republican governor of Maryland, John Hogan, who was on the phone to the White House begging for permission to allow the Maryland National Guard to come aid the Capitol building, and he was refused by the White House. You have a memo that Chris Miller, who Donald Trump installed as his acting Secretary of Defense after he fired 2 of them, in the last year of his presidency. This was he put him in just a month before January 6th, a few weeks before January 6th. And Chris Miller on January 4th, and you can easily find this. It's all over the internet. It's been declassified. It's on the letterhead of the Secretary of Defense, January 4th, 2021. Chris Miller wrote a memo to the D.C. National Guard. And by the way, I don't believe there's 20,000 members, but in any case, he wrote a memo, and again, for the record, Nancy Pelosi has nothing to do with the National Guard. She's the Speaker of the House of Representatives. She can hire and fire congressional aides, but she can't do anything with the National Guard. But this is what Chris Miller, the Secretary, let me finish, and I'll give you all the time you want. This is what the Secretary of Defense wrote to the D.C. National Guard 2 days before January 6th. Without my personal authorization, the D.C. National Guard is not authorized to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or ballistic projection equipment such as helmets and body armor. They may not, the D.C. National Guard may not interact physically with protesters except when necessary in self-defense. The D.C. National Guard may not employ any riot control agents. The D.C. National Guard may not share equipment with law enforcement agencies. The D.C. National Guard may not use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets to conduct ISR, incident awareness, or assessment activities. The D.C. National Guard may not...
Yes! It's not BS. The mayor of Washington was the one who told me he couldn't bring in the National Guard. They were marching towards the White House.
The mayor of D.C. could not bring
BLM.
in.
Listen,
oh God!
I let you talk. You let me talk.
Yeah,
that's what you said.
You can
I'll
have
give
the
you
last...
all the time in the world.
Go for it.
Here's the last word. All the people that have listened to you. When BLM was burning down the country and they were having their predominantly peaceful riots, you never called them out. Now all of a sudden you're having a hearing, you're having a show which we all know is being produced by a Hollywood director. This is all being run by a Hollywood director. That's
John,
not true.
You are such a victim.
And now all of a sudden, I'm a victim.
This is so sad.
I'm a victim. It's sad. All right, simple as this. My life was so much better under Donald Trump. I could afford to go places. My pension was doing better. I was eating well. Now, I can't afford the fuel. It's only going to get worse.
John, you're such a victim. I get it. We feel so sorry for you, John. And I get it that you're so frightened about black people coming to Washington, D.C. And you're saying that they're trying to burn down the country. Oh, those terrible black people. John, take your racism and go somewhere else, please. I'm over it. You know, I have a fairly high level of tolerance for this kind of stuff. I've been doing this for 19 years, but holy cow. BLM trying to burn down Washington, D.C.? Come on. First of all, it wasn't just Black Lives Matter. It was, in fact, in a lot of those marches, it was mostly white people. Secondly, we were protesting police violence against black people. Third, most of the actual violence was committed by, well, you had right-wingers. You had this ex-cop in Minneapolis smashing windows. Here in Portland, we had white anarchists who were doing things. It wasn't BLM.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But John, you keep telling yourself that story about what a victim you are and how sad you are and how you know, what tragedy it is. I get it. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact
that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls and just making sure there's no more Republicans who want to talk to me on the line. Mark in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's on your line? What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure.
I wanted to call and point out that a lot of times when we put forth common sense arguments, they're immediately shut down by especially conservatives on the other side. And so I feel that we need to frame it in a way that they can empathize with and understand, because I have a feeling that a lot of conservatives actually agree with some of our points. They just don't know it because they're blinded. They got their blinders on. And so what I've tried to do is to phrase it in a way that they can understand and grasp and realize what's really at stake here. And mainly I'm talking about the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which is, while primarily it is about abortion and abortion rights, the crew of the issue is religious freedoms and your freedom of religion. And if you phrase it like this, they have no choice but to understand it. Say you have a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew that all go out for lunch. Now, this might sound like there's a punchline coming, but this is no joke. If the Christian orders a bacon double cheeseburger and goes down to eat, but then both the Jew and the Muslim say, well, no, you can't have that. You can't eat that because my religion dictates that I can't eat pork. Well, now that sounds insane, of course, because what right do they have to imply or force their religious views on someone else who doesn't share that same religion? Right. And that's the issue that the Supreme Court is just glossing over by allowing their religious views to be forced on other people through the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So the final point would be, if you, as a conservative in America, don't like the thought of someone else's religious law being imposed on you, whether it's a Jewish law or Sharia law or any religion, you name it, if you don't want to live your life in America by their religious rules, then by default, you agree with us in saying that we shouldn't have to live by Christian rules.
Yeah, it's a good point, Mark. And obviously the court is applying their religious perspective here in the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade. It, however, is even far more dangerous than that, because they are denying essentially the 9th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that just because we haven't named specific rights in this Constitution doesn't mean that people don't have rights. And,
exactly.
And that came out of a huge debate between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson insisted that he would blow up the Constitution. He had considerable influence over the Virginia delegation, even though he was living in Paris at the time this was being written. He was our envoy to France. he had considerable power and influence over the Virginia delegation, and he said he would stop the Virginia delegation from ratifying the Constitution, which would have ended the whole Constitution if James Madison would not include a Bill of Rights in it. And so Madison went along with this, but Alexander Hamilton came out, and he actually makes this argument in one of the Federalist Papers. It's in the 50s or 60s. I don't remember which one it is. But Hamilton actually makes this argument. He's trying to take on Jefferson, where he says that if we start naming individual rights, like the First Amendment, your right to free speech, or the Fourth Amendment, your right to privacy, if we start naming these individual rights, future Americans who don't see the world the way we do may assume that these are the only rights that are protected. And in response to that, they put the Ninth Amendment into the Constitution. And the Ninth Amendment, because I mean, you know, there's no like right to drive a car. There's no right to go from state to state. There's no right to get married. There's no right to eat food. There's no right to grow a garden in your backyard. You know, none of these things are laid out in the Bill of Rights. So we have the Ninth Amendment of the Constitution, which says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. And so what the Supreme Court did with Roe, well, actually they did it with Griswold back in the 60s, was they said, we are finding in the First, the Fourth, the Fifth, and the Ninth Amendment, and they're including the Ninth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, but they're including the Ninth Amendment in that, was that, you know, this might have been just a kind of common law right, a right that everybody acknowledged. We are finding a right to privacy, individual, personal, bodily autonomy. You may do with your body what you want. You may do with your life what you want, as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of other people. And therefore, in Griswold, you may have birth control in your home. Therefore, in Loving v. Virginia, you may marry somebody of a different race. Therefore, in Lawrence v. Texas, you may have sex with somebody who is the same gender you are. Therefore, in Obergefell, you may marry somebody who is the same gender you are. Because we have recognized this right of privacy, and therefore, in Roe v. Wade, if you're pregnant, you may end that. You may terminate that pregnancy as long as it's not viable, as long as it's not a baby, as long as it's a zygote or a fetus, and you know, it's pretty straightforward stuff. But what the court did is they didn't just end the right to abortion at the federal level in the United States. They also established. They also basically struck down the foundation on which all those other rights that the court has recognized in those 4 other decisions that I just laid out, or maybe 5 other decisions that I just laid out. So all of those decisions, as Justice Thomas said in his dissent, and he's the author of this decision, or no, he was the author of the gun decision. Anyhow, what Thomas said in his, Alito was the author of this decision. What Thomas said in his dissent was, now we've got to look at Lawrence, and he said everything except Loving, and of course he didn't mention Loving because he's married to a white woman and he's black.
Exactly.
You know, which is pretty cynical. I mean, you know, it's just and fairly hypocritical, frankly. So, you know, here we go. It's off to the races. Next year, this Supreme Court is going to. You know, I predict that by this time next year, there will no longer be a federal right to gay marriage. There will no longer be a federal right to contraception. There will no longer be a federal right to have sex with whoever you want, as long as they're a consenting adult. I mean, you know, it's just this is the direction that we're going, and frankly, I think that there are a lot of people who are cheering on the court right now, who are going to. It's going to start dawning on them that this is not the world they thought, or the America that they thought it was, and it's ultimately going to get very hostile to them. Mark, thank you for the call. Excellent points all. Dan in Croft Stream, Illinois. Do I have that right?
Carroll Stream.
Oh, Carroll Stream. Okay. Missing a letter here.
You know what? Long-time listener, first-time caller, Tom.
Thank you.
And I just got to say, I really love what you just said. In fact, that's tying right with what I want to say, and that is that we don't need to add another Supreme Court justice or 4 more justices to the court to rein in the court. We have the Constitution on our side. The Constitution, 3rd article, 2nd section, 2nd paragraph, Congress can limit the jurisdiction of the court.
Correct.
So we can limit them that they cannot
It's just never been done. That's the problem. It's never been done. But and when it is done, it will provoke what's called a constitutional crisis. You will have the court going against Congress. But Congress has the power. And the executive branch, if they go along with Congress, has the power to execute. Just like, Abraham Lincoln said to the court, screw you. You've in Dred Scott, you said that black people in New York State are now enslaved again. We're not going to follow that. It's Andrew Jackson when the court said, "Oh yeah, no, the second Bank of the United States is just fine." Andrew Jackson said, "No, it's not. I'm going to shut it down." Trail of Tears. There have been 3 times that I know of where Congress and the executive branch, specifically actually the executive branch, the president, has defied the court. And I doubt it's going to happen now in this era. I don't think that the Democrats, frankly, have the kind of courage, if that's the right word, or willingness to defy that both Lincoln and Jackson had. But I sure would like to see it.
Oh, so would I. And I think it'd be a lot simpler because that you're reclaiming your authority as Congress.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the crises we have going in society today is we don't think that the Congress can do anything. Well, this would say that they do. They can stand up for people. Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you very much, Dan. Ron in Seattle. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind?
Hey, long-time listener and also first-time caller.
Well, thank you.
The thought crossed my mind, mulling all this recent information, was that it was a unpopular Supreme Court action in the 50s that prompted the Montgomery bus strike that I believe went on for a year, maybe a little more, and ultimately achieved its goal. And that
what was the Supreme Court action that provoked the Montgomery bus strike?
Of the denial of, I don't know.
Oh, you're talking about Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, the separate but equal doctrine.
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
Some way of, I don't know how this would work, but some sort of organized civic action that would not necessarily impair the work of the court, but somehow disrupt civic action at a certain level that the government simply could not move on with the other business of the government.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't know how that would work, but some sort of on a scale of a bus strike, of just saying everybody's not going to ride this bus now,
right,
until we get what we want.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, Ron. Generally boycotts are not national boycotts are not effective. Local boycotts can be very effective, but whether that would be the way to do it, I don't know. This November is going to be fascinating because there's a number of issues here that should be bringing voters out of the woodwork. And then you get, right-wing hate radio out there talking about, BLM is trying to burn down the country and all this, racist nonsense that they're spouting to get our earlier caller of the world, these poor people, these poor suckers all whipped up. It's like, it's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Ron, thank you for the call. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back here on the True People's Meeting. And welcome back. Mary in Long Beach, Washington. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I have a couple thoughts that, in my mind, and perhaps I'm simple-minded because I like things down to the very basic stuff. On Jefferson's memorial, it says something or other to the effect, he swore eternal hostility against every form of tyranny imposed upon the mind of man. That's one idea. I got 2 more. The other is that no one can faithfully serve 2 masters at the same time. And then the third one is that the Venn diagram of Christian values and the values of democracy are not a circle. And when we come to where they are not overlapping, we have to let the secular government make the definitions of what applies to the law of people. And it has to be determined by the people, the way I see it. So taking those three things, what I'm saying is we shouldn't even pass any laws about abortion because we cannot define through science or law or religion the word for the beginning of life. If we can't define the beginning of life, there will never be any law that we can pass that will bring peace to everybody. It shouldn't.
You're
even
not going
be
to find a consensus on this, Mary. I mean, you've got different religions that are defining when life begins in different ways, and then you've got secular people defining that. But to your Jefferson quote, may I enlighten you a little bit about where that quote came from, where he said, "I've sworn eternal hostility. I've sworn upon the altar of God, eternal hostility against every form." I
read your article.
Oh, you did? Okay, so you know that came out of his letter in which he was talking about the preachers. He was saying that the church was the tyranny that he was specifically standing up against. Yeah, Mary, I get your point, and I think that defining the beginning of life is I mean there are biological arguments to be made, but I think at the end of the day it's really a religious argument, and that's just something that we're never going to resolve.
Well, that's my point. That's why it shouldn't even be debated as a law for Congress to pass.
I agree.
Practice medicine, and preachers should teach religion, and government should pass laws according to the will of the people. And when it comes to defining the beginning of life, none of the three overlap. So if they want to regulate abortion, do it through the medical community, and through the population, the preachers can preach, and the doctors practice medicine, and the democracy passes laws according to the will of the people, and abortion should never come up because it's private.
Yeah, well, there's two layers to this, Mary, as I'm sure you know. One is the religious layer, but the other is just the desire on the part of many people to control women.
That's true too.
I would just say that this is just another dimension of the historic. I mean, 10,000 years of history, oppression of women.
The separation of church and state, however, had tenets to.
You're right, Mary. I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. So are you and your family and your kids safer with a gun in the house? Well, Pew Research Center and Children's Hospital put together some amazing statistics. These are all quotes from their study. Quote, guns kept in homes are more likely to be involved in a fatal or non-fatal accidental shooting, criminal assault, or suicide attempt than to be used to injure or kill in self-defense. Your kids aren't safer either. Quote, between 2015 and 2020, there were at least 2,070 unintentional shootings by children that resulted in 765 deaths and 1,366 non-fatal gun injuries. In 2020 alone, at least 125 toddlers and children under age 5 shot themselves or someone else. And the pandemic didn't help. Unintended shootings in 2020 from March to December went up more than 30% compared to the previous year. And a shocking number of gun owners leave their firearms lying around unsecured. 1 in 3 guns are unlocked in the homes. I've got a video with all the details over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, picking up your calls. Beth in Albuquerque. Hey, Beth, what's up? Beth in Albuquerque? I am not hearing Beth. Okay, let's. Yes. Oh, Beth, I'm sorry. You hit the button just as you said yes. Steve, and we'll have to try again next week. Steve in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Well, I was just looking through the internet, and those Talibangelical lawyers, and, you know, they're trying to go after the male's abortion side too, because now they want to ban nonaloxone 9, which is a spermicide and lubrication. But
really?
That's not. Yeah, that's not why I'm calling. What I'm calling is I've never heard anybody mention this. Since abortion now is illegal predominantly in the red states, are rape kits now classified as illegal to have as well?
Well, rape kits don't provoke abortions. What has happened is that, and I reported on this yesterday, a hospital chain with 14 hospitals, I forget the state, but they used to, St. Luke's was the name of the hospital chain. They used to provide Plan B, high-dose birth control pills essentially to rape victims so that if the egg was fertilized to the fallopian tubes, it would not implant in the uterus, and you just have a normal period. They're no longer doing that because they're afraid that they may incur legal liability from doing that. I think it's in Missouri. I could be wrong, though.
Well,
I'd have to go back and look.
You heard what the governor is trying to do with our abortion. They're trying to make every Missourian a bounty hunter if we're out of state and we're in another
Just like
state,
Texas.
and we know. Yeah. But the bounty is much higher. That's
really?
what they're proposing.
What's your bounty for women in Missouri?
Well, Hawley was claiming $50,000.
Josh Hawley, the U.S. Senator? Wow.
Well, I don't claim him a senator.
I get it. Steve, thank you for the call. I need to move along, but thank you. Paul in Sparta, Wisconsin. Hey, Paul, you want to talk about General Flynn?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Maybe you can help me or somebody, but can't General Flynn be brought back by the military for one day and either strip him of his rank or strip him of his retirement, because he's still running around the country saying, hey, we need a violent overthrow of the U.S. government?
I know. I don't know enough about the Uniform Code of Military Justice to know if that's practical or even possible. But if it is either or both, I would be fully in favor of it, Paul. I do think that what he is doing, if he were trying to do it while he was still in the military, would land him in the brig. Paul, thank you. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call. You cannot reason with irrational people. I have a question for you regarding Gore v. Bush. What are your thoughts about this unhinged Supreme Court is willing to, in my opinion, to give the next presidential election to the next Republican candidate? What are your thoughts on that? And if they lose the election, they're going to go to the Supreme Court and just hand the election to a Republican.
This is what they're going to decide next year. They just announced it, that they're taking a case that has to do with this doctrine, which is in the Constitution, that the states may decide how their electoral college votes are cast. And you've got a couple of states that have said we're no longer going to cast our electoral college votes based on how people in our state vote. We're going to do it based on how our legislature votes. And I'm guessing the Supreme Court is going to say, yeah, that's what the Constitution says. You can go along with your legislature, and which is going to give states controlled by Republicans, even if they're purple states, like Georgia, which voted for Joe Biden, is going to give the people of Georgia the power, the Republicans in their legislature, the power to toss the election to the Republicans. They're setting up the theft of the 2024 election right now. And we need to do something about that. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. Hope you have a wonderful 4th of July holiday, by the way. And we'll see you soon. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, We also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.